Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 304 of the Ruby Rogues podcast. This week on our panel we have Brian Hogan.
Hello everyone.
Jason Swett.
Hello.
I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv. Go submit your talks for Rails or Ruby Remote Conf. We also have a special guest this week, and that is Obie Fernandez. Obie, do you want to say hi, introduce yourself for a second?
Yeah, hi. It's a pleasure to be on the show. Longtime fan. I'm probably best known in the Rails community for writing the Rails Way series, the Rails Way, the Rails 3-Way, Rails 4-Way. Actually worked with Jason a little bit at a company called Andela. That's really kicking ass. Developing, helping to cultivate a software development culture in Africa, of all places. And just been doing software development and stuff in that area for almost 25 years. Coming on 25 years. So, yeah, that's me.
Awesome. Well, I'm just going to jump right in with some of this. So the Rails 5-Way or the Rail, I remember when it was the Rails 2-Way or the Rails Way, those books coming out. I'm curious, what kind of prompted that? How did you wind up pulling that together? And it seems like it's kind of grown into this whole professional Ruby series, so it's more than just that book now. Hey everybody, this is Charles Max Wood. I just wanted to talk to you really briefly about JS Remote Conf. We just picked speakers. Things are looking really good, and we're really excited to cover a broad range of topics for JavaScript developers. So if you're looking to learn things about Node.js, about becoming a better developer, about deployment, about mobile development, and much more about JavaScript, then come check us out, jsremoteconf.com. You can also find it by going to devchat.tv/conferences and then picking the conference you want. We have last year's recordings there. We have this year's conference coming up, so make sure you get your ticket, and we'll see you there. Pulling that together, and it seems like it's kind of grown into this whole professional Ruby series, so it's more than just that book now.
Well, I mean, it's ancient history now, but I mean, at the first RubyConf I ever went to was in 2005, and there was an editor from Addison Wesley there, and she was asking, great gal, Deborah Williams from Addison Wesley. She was asking around, just trying to get a sense of who were the writers in the group, as editors do at conferences. And someone referred her to me because I was blogging a lot about Ruby and Rails. I had just come out of about 9 years in the Java community. I was really, really excited and was writing a lot of things on my blog almost every day. So she said, do you want to write a book about Ruby and or Rails? And at the time, their only Ruby book was The Ruby Way by Hal Fulton. And that had done reasonably well, and they just kind of wanted to do something else using Ruby. And the interesting part was that originally I didn't really have a great idea for the book, but I had started doing some consulting with Rails at the enterprise level at a big company called John Deere. And I said, I think I can write about using Rails in the enterprise. And in fact, like I think the year after that, I gave a talk at O'Reilly OSCON about that sort of thing. Amazing because it was way premature. Like it was just a very, very ambitious kind of topic. But she said fine, and I presented an outline, and I started working on the book, and I got about 2-3 chapters in and realized, oh man, I don't really have a book here. Like using Rails in the enterprise is like a blog post, or something like that. It's not really a full length book. But then I was looking at the fact that the Ruby Way had become a competitor, a viable competitor to the Prague's Ruby reference book, and I said, let me just do that for Rails, and then the market can have like another option versus the pragmatic Rails book. And they thought that was a good idea, and in talking to some other authors and things like that, it kind of started very quickly figuring out like, hey, if you're going to put the energy into writing a book, you might as well write a big ass reference book. something that a lot of people are going to buy. So I started working on that. The Railsway ended up taking 2 years to write, but along the way, I was pretty proud of myself, and I called my dad, Marco, and he was visiting, and I was talking to him and bragging about the book, and he wasn't really getting what a big deal it was to have a book being published on Addison Wesley. So I walk over and I pull Martin Fowler's Patterns of Enterprise Application Architecture off the shelf and like bring it over to him. And I'm like, look, Dad, I used to work with Martin, or I guess at the time I was still working with Martin. I'm like, and Martin's a big deal. He's like one of the best-selling authors in the tech world, and he's like this highly respected figure. And this is his publisher, and I'm publishing a book with this publisher. And he takes a look at the book, and if you look at that book, you'll see that it's a Martin Fowler signature series. And my dad's a ball buster, and he loves to troll people. So he says to me, he was like super mad about it. He's like, get back to me when you have a signature series yourself. So
that's really funny.
I was kind of annoyed, but also thought it was kind of funny and whatever. I thought it was a funny story. So I told Deb, my editor, and she was like, oh, sweetie. She talks with this sudden drawl. She's like, oh, sweetie, you could have a series if you want one. You just got to send me a series proposal. I said, a signature series? She said, no, not a signature series, but you can have a series. You could be a series editor. And I said, okay, what does that mean? And she said, no, you just got to have an idea for the series. And it seems like Ruby's going to take off. Keep in mind, this is like 2006, right? It seems like Ruby's going to take off. And I was pretty excited. So I put together a proposal and I put all these ideas for books. So it was like Ruby and XML, Ruby and, printing stuff with Ruby. I don't know. It was like a list of 20 titles of stuff that I thought would be good with, to do in a Ruby series. And I submitted it and they said, okay. And as a series editor, you basically take over the job of, I guess it's called executive editing. And you're pretty much thinking about, okay, what are the ideas? Who can I get to write them? How can I recruit them? Kind of overall vision, overall quality control, helping out. You get to write the forwards, and you make what's called an override on the royalty. So you basically make a few points or less, actually. But you make some money on each one of the titles sold in the series. So I got to say, it's a pretty good deal, and you get the prestige of being able to say, I'm the series editor of the Professional Ruby series by Addison Wesley, which is not as big a deal as it sounds, but it generally impresses people.
Obie, I have a question about how the book came into existence.
Sure.
So I read your book, Obie, like way before I met you, and we talked on the phone. Which, by the way, it was like getting a call from the president or something like that when I first talked to you, because it was like, oh, I read your book and now we're talking.
It's so unfortunate how much that's been devalued these days. But okay, go ahead.
Well, your book, it's pretty thick, like it's pretty comprehensive. And when I read it, I'm like, wow, this guy knows a lot about Rails. I wonder how he knew all this stuff about Rails and then apparently just took what was in his head and wrote it down. And since that time, I've talked with a lot more people who have written books, and I'm learning that maybe it doesn't really work that way. Like maybe I had it backwards. Maybe a person doesn't know all that stuff to start with, and then they just do a brain dump into a book. Maybe they say, I want to write a book, and then the book is what forces them to learn all that stuff. And it probably works both ways in different cases. But I wonder what was the case with you? Like, obviously you knew some stuff about Rails, but did the process of writing that book force you to learn a lot more stuff than you already knew?
No. No. It's a good question, and you're spot on. I mean, it did force me to learn a lot. Writing a book, especially a big reference book like that, has a lot more to do than just writing. It has, and also I got a lot of help. Like, David Black wrote a couple of the chapters, and they're Trotter Cashin. There's all these people that wrote some significant portions of things, and when you undertake an effort like that, and I can't remember how big the Railsway was, but it was at least 700 pages. You're not writing it all yourself. You're pulling it together. And there's just no way, especially at that time, that I could possibly have all that stuff in my head. I don't know that anyone could have a big reference book like that in their head. I don't think it works that way unless you're a freak of nature like Tim Pope or something. But it's, generally speaking, you have an outline, you have the areas you want to cover, and then you delve in, and then you do the research, and then you flesh it out. For a reference book. Now, since that time, I've also written some other books and manuscripts that are slightly different styles. And for those kinds of books, I use something called the Fieldstone method, which was named and popularized by Gerald Weinberg. And what you do there is like you use something like Evernote or just simple text files or whatever, and you keep track of ideas and notes as they come to you organically. So you're not working on a fixed schedule. You're just anytime you see, and it's called the Fieldstone method because somewhere, I don't know where, but they build walls out of field stones, and a field stone is literally a rock, a stone that you find in a field. And I guess if you were a farmer back in the day or whatever, you couldn't go to Home Depot and just buy a whole bunch of rocks. You would have to make a pile of rocks, and then eventually, sometimes I guess after years of collecting these rocks as you plowed them up, and you had sufficiently big sized rocks, then you could build a wall. So the Fieldstone method for writing a book, which I've used now a couple times, I feel like pretty successfully, is you keep these notes, and you know that you eventually want to write a book. You don't know when you're going to get to it, but eventually you have a big enough pile of these topics that you can put them together. And the other thing too is, for anyone that's trying to write a book, it's better to write kind of like generalist topics, things that are a little more evergreen and that can be seen by a wide audience. Two, don't assume that you're just going to write it all yourself. Like I'm kind of repeating myself a little bit, but you're going to get a lot of help, and you should get a lot of help. Like people love to help. And if you wrote every single word in there, you're still going to need people to review it. You're going to still need technical review, which is people like actually trying to apply what you did. I find it hard to believe that there would be technical authors that are actually like literally transcribing the expertise from their head onto the page, if that makes sense.
No, that's exactly what I assumed was happening. Which maybe a lot of people assume that because that's what it seems like. You read these books by these experts, like you mentioned Martin Fowler, and like that he's a guy who knows a bunch of stuff. And so it's kind of easy to naively assume that they're just taking the stuff they know and dumping it onto the page. Well, that's totally not how it works.
Yeah, you're always spot on with how a lot of people write books. That Fieldstone method is it's ridiculously popular. Whenever I end up seeing books that I'm editing, a lot of times it is that initial conversation is, well, I've been collecting these little nuggets over the years, and now now I have a story I want to tell, and now my job is to put them all together. And it's like, yeah, that's exactly what your job is. It's accumulated knowledge, it's accumulated wisdom, and a lot of times you're just a curator of these kinds of things. You are going to ask someone to write a chapter for you here and there, but you're curating this knowledge because you as the primary author often have the experience to know what's important, what aligns with the goals of your book or whatever, and what's less important. So you're sort of pulling a lot of those things together. Even though you may not know the details of those things, you still maybe know who knows the details of those things.
And it's a good thing too, because the way that books actually get finished is you have to work on them like every day, or if not every day, like almost every day, but on a very regular rhythm and schedule. Yeah. And I don't know about anyone else, but at least me, I don't have the energy to write every day on a project like that. Like I get up in the morning, I try to do 750 words first thing before I do anything else. That I got that from The Artist's Way, and there's a site called 750words.com, which is probably one of my picks. But that I can do every day, but like actual sit down and get like a serious amount of original writing committed to the page every day, I can't do that. But what I can do if I'm forcing myself to finish a book, like what I'm currently doing with the Rails 5-Way, is every day make edits, right? So like I'm moving some paragraphs around, I'm validating stuff, I'm trying some code, refactoring. I mean, trying to just improve the structure, importing the code instead of having it copied, stuff like that. That you can find something like that to do every day, right? Adding cross references, whatever your mental capacity allows you to do that night.
Yeah.
And then eventually you're finished.
Yeah. Make progress on the project every day. Don't necessarily have to write new stuff every day. I think the first book I ever wrote, I think I wrote 900 pages for that book, and we ended up reducing it to 250. So a lot of the time can be spent deleting stuff too.
Yeah, deleting stuff. I deleted the RSpec chapter. I'm not sure if I'm going to put it back, but I was like, why am I? Because what ended up happening was I added to the RSpec chapter, and it got up to close to 100 pages, I think. I don't know what the printed output would be, but I mean, it's huge. And I'm like, why is this in here? Like, I should pull this out and just make a testing the Rails Way book. And because there's all this other stuff I want to talk about with testing as well. Not just the mechanics of the syntax of RSpec and how you put suites together. I want to talk about the rationale and what's my thoughts on how you do TDD and when it's called for or not. And what is the proper level of test coverage? How do you get the best regression coverage? Things like that. And there's all this stuff, and eventually I realized I don't need to have this chapter in here. I just pull it out. And I think being smart about reusing things that you have, like I'm trying to get a hold of a lot of the lectures that I did at Andela because they were recorded. And I think that I can actually take and transcribe some of those things, and there's my content. And then it's just a matter of curating and boiling it down, right? And getting it to the good stuff, putting it together in a structure and a story that makes sense. And I got another book. And a lot of us that are active in things like podcasting or giving talks and stuff like that, I think we have that at our disposal. It's just a matter of figuring that out and actually grabbing hold of it.
So I'm curious.
So there's another thing, Obie, that go ahead, Chuck.
No, go ahead.
There's another thing that I'm dying to know about the process of having written the Rails Way, which is you were telling the story about how you had a conversation with somebody from Addison Wesley about writing a book. What gave you the confidence that you could write a book? Because I'm thinking, like, if somebody asked me to write a book, I'd be like, I don't know if I could write a book. And a lot of people probably feel that way. So what made you feel like you could do it?
I really wanted to write a book. So for years at that point, I wanted to be an author. Like, it was just a conceit, that I wanted to write. I liked writing. At that point, I had been blogging. Like, if you count LiveJournal, I'd been blogging on a regular basis for, probably 10 or more years at that point. So I was used to writing on a regular basis, writing for fun, right? And then once I started blogging, in a serious way at ThoughtWorks, it was no longer just for fun. It was also to build reputation and start getting my name out there. So yeah, I mean, I was cocky. I have to admit. I mean, there's a certain amount of arrogance, whether it's called for or not, that it takes to put yourself out there and say, okay, I'm gonna claim the mantle of expertise on something, knowing full well that you're not actually an expert.
And I think it's probably important to realize that, like, nobody comes and blesses you with permission to write a book. Like, you just have to decide that you can, right?
Yeah. You just have to decide that you can, and that's, for better or worse, I've heard it said that's one of the differences between the sexes, for instance, is that, us males are typically a lot more cocky about putting ourselves out there and and pretending like we're experts on something and giving ourselves permission to go out there and talk about something. And it's something that I was preternaturally blessed with, I guess. Mm-hmm. So I had no shortage of that.
So I kind of want to ask, and we've kind of been talking around this a little bit, but it seems like in a lot of these books, yes, it's a reference, and yes, you try to cover mostly everything, right, in a reference book. But I mean, some of this is going to be colored by your opinion on where we're at with Rails. What's going on with Rails 5? What's the right way to do it? I mean, the Rails way kind of implies that this is the way you write Rails. So I'm curious, what is your opinion of where we're at with Rails, and how did that influence the book, The Rails 5 Way?
Well, I want to answer that first by clarifying something, which is that the Rails way is a little misnamed. It probably should or would more accurately be named the Rails what. And there's some stuff in there that lends itself to saying this is the way that you do it. But given that it's Ruby and given the philosophy of Ruby development, of Rails development, there's at least 2 or 3 ways to do anything. And in a lot of cases, they're valid. So the stuff where the book gets really prescriptive and lives up to its name has to do, for instance, with describing RESTful, how you use REST and stuff like that. And in the Vue chapter, when I talk about helpers, I start getting a little prescriptive about some techniques and things like that. But most of the book is a reference book in the sense that it pulls together in, I think, a well-organized and comprehensive fashion what you need in order to do day-to-day Rails development. And my objective was always to have a book that you could have at next to your keyboard, and you could just flip through it real quick. Especially like if you were offline or something like that, or nowadays, do you actually need that? And a lot of people seem to buy the book in electronic form. So I guess they're looking at it in a PDF reader or Kindle or whatever. But I mean, I still like having a paper book right next to me in that old school way. But it really is the Rails what. And now what I'm writing and what I'm proud to be writing is I'm going to call Mastering the Rails Way. And that's been a Fieldstone effort that's just getting underway. I'm pulling the outline together, and that is really like, okay, this is how Obie writes Rails apps, and like, this is kind of like the sum of my knowledge that I've gained in my, 10, 20 years of doing serious app development, influenced by OO, influenced by people like Martin Fowler, bringing those patterns together. And what makes me good at that? And that's coming a lot more out of my head, right? Because now it's not just reference material. Now it's very much more prescriptive and techniques and do this, don't do that. Yes, that's there, but I'm not even going to talk about it because you shouldn't do that.
Would it be possible, Obie, for you to give us a little bit of a feel for what's that like? Because here's something that I wonder. So I've worked on quite a number of Rails apps over the years. Yeah. And just because of the roll of the dice of what the background of that project was and who was working on it, the code is probably not going to be very good, right? And so most of the projects I've inherited are somewhere between horrific and just plain bad. What I don't get to see very much is something that's exemplary, And so I always wonder, like, if this had been coded by somebody who really, really knew what they were doing, how different would it be? And I think the main thing I'm curious about is, like, do you kind of just put the things in the slots that Rails gives you to fill in, or do you give it your whole, like, do you put your own structure into it in a way that I might not even be aware of, if that idea makes any sense? But I wonder if you could just kind of paint that picture a little bit.
Well, I'm a big fan of the way that David does Rails apps as far as he's described the way that he uses REST and the way that he implements controllers and things like that. So there's a lot of foundation in that, because over the years I've found him to be right. Surprise, surprise. He made the framework. He guides it. The way that he works it is probably going to, give you good results. But there's so much more depth, when you're actually working on Rails apps day in, day out. And I also have, like for instance, right now with my day-to-day with Kickass, there's one project that I'm maintaining that it's a legacy app that was written by someone that didn't really know what they were doing. So it's pretty bad, possibly horrific in places. But I also have a couple of projects that I've written from scratch in Rails 5 that are starting to get complicated, and those are really good. So I'm seeing the benefits of those things that I'm doing with them, and I'm kind of seeing a lot of the promise of Rails come to fruition, because Rails 5 is feels so mature. A lot of the libraries you rely on feel so mature, they just work. You're not like spending half your day debugging. You're basically not doing Node and JavaScript style development, which is very wasteful in my opinion, because it's so bleeding edge. You're actually getting work done. But there's so much depth there. There's so much depth into what makes it the right way, the maintainable way to do stuff. And they have to. A lot of them are very design, so they're subjective by nature, very very design oriented. Like your OO design questions, your decisions around like how do I model something. Like I've had a spate of instances lately where I've had an object and a related template object. So it's like basically you're representing in your app at the app level the fact that you have a standardized kind of template or instance of something, and then as a client or a customer you want to take that template and you want to make it your own. So how do you design that in your app? And there's at least two different significant ways that you could go. Like you come to a fork in the road, you go, like, how am I going to implement this? One, if you want me to delve into it for a couple of minutes, like you can just have one class. So I'll put it in the context of do props, because this is like I'm rewriting do props, which is your, if you're not familiar with it, it's like a thank you card system. So you have like the do props standard stars. But when you're setting up a do props network, you're basically cloning a star and making it your own. So you can change the image, you can change the title, the description, whatever. So you have like a standard star and you have a star. One of the ways you can implement this, if you want to have standard stars, is to have a foreign key association to the network that the star belongs to. And if you want it to be a standard star, meaning it doesn't belong to a particular network, you could leave that foreign key association null. Right? So then you just have this like special class of star that is not connected to a particular network. And then you could set up a scope and you could say, these are my templates where the foreign key is null. But then if you do that, then what are the outcomes? Like what happens with that? What are the special cases you have to start putting in? What kind of conditional logic do you have to put in? And is it a violation of solid, proven OO methods? Are you putting more than one responsibility into that class? Is it really one class, or is it really two concepts? Because the responsibility of one is to represent the concept of a particular star, and the responsibility of the other is the realization of that concept with a particular network. You get what I'm saying? So that's pretty deep. And that's something that represents like, okay, if I'm going to talk about how do you do this in Rails, that's the Rails way, but it's too much. It's too deep to get into in a reference book. You can kind of allude to some of these things. You could drop hints, but if you took all the opportunities to go into the how and the why of you do, certain things a certain way, the book would get, thousands of pages long after a while.
Yeah, it seems like certain things can only really be meaningfully conveyed via example, which wouldn't be like necessarily super appropriate in a reference book. But that's something that I just am dying to see. And maybe it's available somewhere and I just don't know about it. But like there exist all these open source projects and you can look at the code for it. Like I could go look at the code for Sidekick or any other gem, and that would be educational in a certain way. But it's not really like, it's not a production Rails app written for a client. You know, it's a library. And so the code is going to be totally different. And so like the opportunity to kind of look over somebody's shoulder when they're writing a real Rails application would be awesome. And I don't know if that's like,
it's hard because clients, you know, they pay you to write an app and they don't want you splashing it on, you know, all over your book and telling people how to write the app that's going to compete with them. It takes a very open-minded client to say, yeah, it's okay. I'm confident enough in my business model and my brand to know that it's not the actual source code that is going to let someone compete with me.
Right. This is a problem that transcends just, you know, that transcends Rails. It's an issue with just experience in software development, because a lot of times maybe you get lucky and you're writing some CRUD application that you've written 100 times before, but if you're writing something that if you're solving a problem you've never solved before and you're writing an application for that, all you have to go on is your experience. And so when I started out consulting, I would run into these applications and the code would be, oh my gosh, I can't believe a person would have done this. Then I realized the situation they were in, and I realized, well, they did the best they could with the knowledge they had in the situation and the time frame that they had. There's so many things like related to the second system effect, things like that. Yeah, if you had the time to rewrite it over, you'd have done it a different way. But you wouldn't know that until you did it the wrong way first. And so what I always wondered is, what can we do as a community to help out with these kinds of things? One of the things I found really awesome is the database community. There's actually a really great website out there that has database schemas for all kinds of different problems, all kinds of different problem domains. You can look at it and you can see, well, if you're going to model a store, an e-commerce solution, and you want an example of a database schema to look at rather than trying to figure out your own, they've got one. If you're trying to do one for the spread of the Ebola virus and tracking that, this site has one. So I'm wondering, what do y'all think about that? What do y'all think about ways that we can help share that knowledge that people need in order to make those good decisions in the more specific domains?
Hey there, this is Charles Max Wood, and I just wanted to talk to you really briefly about Freelance Remote Conf. I'm putting on a conference for people who want to go freelance or who are freelance, and bringing in some of the experts from the Freelancer Show to talk to you about how to find clients, how to collect money, how to build your business, how to specialize, and much, much more. So if you're thinking about going freelance or you're already freelance and want to hear from the experts on how to go, become, or grow your freelancing business, then by all means, come check us out at freelanceremoteconf.com.
Those good decisions in the more specific domains.
Well, I mean, I'm doing my part with the books. I mean, that's my vehicle. And I'm actually, in conjunction with preparing the books, I'm doing a parallel but related effort to rewrite this back burner project that I have called Do Props, which was at one time, venture funded and everything like that. And then it just kind of fizzled out, but kept a small client base. And these loyal clients have been soldiering along with the same legacy app for like going on 5 years. And I've tried maybe 2 or 3 times to actually rewrite it. But something you guys might find interesting and I definitely would love to see more of in the community is my son, I'll give you kind of the full context. My son goes to this after school program at a gaming store, like a board game store nearby. And one of the people that works in the store that actually takes care of him, who I got to know, told me that he was a programmer. And I delved into that a little bit, and it turned out that he had taken a couple of years of CS at the local community college, and in his words, had done a couple of .NET apps for some friends and stuff like that. So I was like, okay, well, here's something that knows. Here's someone that knows at least a little something. And right around New Year's, I made up my mind that I was going to take on an apprentice no matter what. in 2017. It was kind of like a resolution. And I went over to this guy, Josh, and I said, hey, I don't know if you know who I am or whatever, but you can look me up, Google me or whatever. And I'm looking for an apprentice. It's something I've done before. And my apprentices have gone on to work at Pivotal Labs and other places and done really well for themselves. If you'd like the opportunity to apprentice for me, here's the deal. I want someone that can work with me for about 2 hours a day, every day. I can't pay you. Your payment is basically, what you're going to learn. And we'll work on whatever I say we're going to work on. And really no other commitment from you needed other than maybe to read apprenticeship patterns so you know what the heck's going on. And he was like, I don't know. Let me get back to you. And a day later, he was like, yes, I'm very interested. So he's been coming over almost every day, around 9:30, and he works for a couple hours with me. And I've been doing something I haven't done before. I basically wrote out the prime directive for this app. I'm kind of looking for the piece of paper here. I have it written down somewhere, but the prime directive I have kind of posted near my desk here, and it's like, do it right. Elegance and, correct design. And we've been doing this since January, almost every day. And it's kind of like we were saying earlier, the way the book gets written is by doing a little bit every day. Well, this guy's kind of like in his apprentice kind of way, my personal trainer, in the sense that he shows up every day. We have a standing appointment, and then he comes, and no matter what else I have going on, I drop everything else and we sit down and we do proper TDD on do props. It's a domain. I know, exactly what I want to build. I have my vision for what it's supposed to be because it's like the third or fourth time that I'm trying to rewrite it. And there's a legacy app that I ultimately want to replace. So I know kind of like the requirements of what needs to be done, but he doesn't know anything. So I have to, it turned out that he, actually knows very reasonably little about anything having to do with programming. And so I've had to go down to like fundamentals and first principles for almost everything that we're doing. And it's at times painfully slow, but it's also so good. One, because I'm helping him, but two, because it's like forcing me to go through in a methodical way and like by teaching, relearn all of these things that I'm like taking the journey with him again.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. When I started teaching full time a few years ago, that was the biggest revelation I had is, programming, but when you teach it to someone who really has no basics, your eyes are really open to what it takes to get there and all the little intricacies that we have forgotten because they become second nature to us. No, I think this idea of apprenticeships, I think that's something too that I think that's awesome that you're doing that. And I think that's something that I'd love to see a lot more people, and not just successful people. I'd like to see people with experience do something like this and figure out ways to sort of pay it forward. Because it's so hard when you're starting out, when you finish. I've looked at my students who finish their software development classes and they go get their first job, and there's just so much that they can't learn when they're in school because it has to be a controlled environment. And then when they're in the uncontrolled environment working on real world problems, there's just so much more learning that happens, but it's so overwhelming. So I've always loved the idea of apprenticeship programs. I'd love to see, if the industry, the companies can't do an apprenticeship program, it's pretty cool to see that they're.
It's just right? What the biggest challenge is it's not capitalistic.
Yeah,
it's the fact that it's not happening is a symptom of a broader malaise in our society, mm-hmm. And the reason that everything is so effed up is because you don't do something like an apprenticeship, like what I'm describing here, for the profit motive.
No,
you don't. You don't invest that kind of time and effort into someone because generally speaking, you don't have a direct ROI. You're literally just giving it to the universe.
I also think it's kind of a long-term, short-term confusion on the employer's part. There's, I worked on an application over the last 6 months, which had really bad code, and it was bad and just every day getting worse. And I asked myself, why is the code so bad? Because the code didn't write itself. The problem is the process by which that code came into existence. And I asked why that is. And what the problem always is everywhere is people feel like because they're under such a time crunch that they can't afford to take the time to write good code, which is partially the fault of the developer, because it's not your manager with your manager's deadlines who is, holding a gun to your head and saying, write this code badly. It's ultimately you who's writing the code. But at the same time, I think there's something to like the employer giving you permission to do your job right and like not getting you in trouble for taking the time to do things correctly. And I think you guys probably know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure how that can be addressed, but I put something in place that I found to be really helpful, which was I said to the management, what if we do like a weekly training program where we just spend an hour and take what's our biggest pain right now, which was we didn't have any test coverage on the front end. And let's start with that and let's address that. Because if we want to get from having this bad situation to having a good situation, if we want to get from point A to point B, first the whole team has to agree like what point B is. And so if we have these training sessions, then it can help us get that shared vision. And that was really helpful. And that was just a pretty small thing, but it requires one thing, which is it requires the employer to be sufficiently enlightened that they understand that they're going to be better off in the long run by taking the time to invest today in educating their employees. That's going to benefit them.
But
later.
it's totally unclear that they'll be actually better off in concrete terms. They may be personally better off in terms of their network and their community, but will the shareholders be better off? And one of the things I come to accept over time is that probably not. And that's the reason that things don't get better in a corporate environment.
Well, it also like I like to turn that around. It's because people say like customers don't care about code. And it's true that they don't care about the code until the day when production grinds to a halt because the code is so bad that nobody can touch anything,
There's some subset where I think that's true, but man, I've had experiences where like if a business model is successful, it's actually so successful that it doesn't matter what the code does. There's always enough money to fix it. And other situations where if the business model is not successful, then there's never enough money to fix it. Like, then to get into a sweet spot where you actually can do this long-term, I don't even know that it's possible in venture-driven and kind of like product-driven companies. In fact, I was kind of thinking of this as you were talking earlier. You know what my biggest source of luck has been, and like the reason that I am who I am today and that I'm in the position that I'm in today? ThoughtWorks and HashRocket. That's it. Because at ThoughtWorks, what I learned is that if you're, I was going to say cojones, but if your arrogance is sufficiently large, if your ego as a company is sufficiently large and your reputation is sufficiently strong, you can pretty much just bully customers into doing exactly what you want them to do and having it take as long as it needs to take. That, and I don't know if I'm getting that across correctly, but like basically we were ThoughtWorks, right? Like we were going to do it the right way, whether you wanted us to do it the right way or not. And it didn't matter what it was going to cost. On a lot of projects, that was the way we were able to do things. And because of that, while I was at ThoughtWorks, I actually got time and experience on projects that were done, let's say, quote unquote, the right way, that actually had solid foundations for good code, for factoring, pairing, all the agile practices, all this stuff. And that's part of what made ThoughtWorks, right? And then what do? I leave ThoughtWorks and I start HashRocket, and I operate the same way, right? I like to say that at HashRocket, I was like at peak arrogance. Is we would take clients on and we would say, it's our way or the highway. Like if you're coming to us, it's because you want your stuff built correctly and you want a foundation, and it really did not matter whether they needed it or not. We were going to build them something really, really high quality. And we pulled that off a lot, enough to get a reputation for doing it. And then you get a positive feedback loop going, and then you're able to like actually get that experience of building things the right way, and you're able to learn it. And without that, comparing and contrasting that to situations that I've been in that have not been that, where I've been at, in enterprise situations or as an employee in IT shops, it's impossible. The pressures that your boss puts on you, to deliver, to cut corners and things like that, never lets you write it the right way. And if you never have that experience of actually correctly architecting or re-architecting, as the case may be, a system, how do you ever learn it? How do you learn it if no one ever teaches it to you?
Right. Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting to hear you say that, because I've had that same thought before. Like, is it even possible for me to improve my skills beyond where they are now if I'm just hammering away at this horrible legacy code that's it's so far below what I already know?
Let's say no.
Right.
Let's just take a moment as a community and let's say no. It's not possible.
Yeah.
And it won't, not everyone will be lucky enough to be able to do this, but if you have the nature to be able to take the risk of rejecting that situation and going to a ThoughtWorks, going to a place where you can actually do that good work, do it. You literally will not be able to level up unless you do, unless you get yourself into one of those situations. And to say otherwise is, it is beginning to feel disingenuous to me. I mean, I guess at the stage where I'm at, am I a little cynical? Yeah, I'm a little cynical, because it's starting to feel disingenuous to say that you can take a beginner and you can somehow educate them in a real world situation where there's deadline pressure and whatever to do things the right way. They'll do it the same. They'll just bang their head against the wall until eventually they learn some lessons, and eventually they start, actually doing certain things the right way. But in terms of getting a holistic immersion into the right way to do things, you only get that in these situations where you can apprentice or be parts of teams that are, just really high performing teams.
And I just want to chime in with something else too, which is you could work with ThoughtWorks and get a certain experience. You can work on a horrible legacy application and get a certain experience. But if you want something in between, and if you just have no other options, a couple other things I think you can do are to just do your own greenfield side project, by yourself. I've done that myself before and I've found value in it. And also finding clients where I own the client, rather than working for a client through an agency or something like that, finding a client that doesn't have an existing code base and I'm just writing some code for them to solve a business problem and I have complete control over everything technical. That's another situation where it's at least better than maintaining a legacy app as far as learning goes.
Yeah, but the thing is, and I think this is Obie's point, is that most beginners and even people who are somewhat experienced who are trying to level up, you tend to do things the way you're shown to do things. And so if you wind up in a ThoughtWorks or a company where they're actually doing things the way that they should be doing them, then you're just going to do things the way you're shown, and then you can learn how to do it more or less the right way. And
yeah, I get a visceral example of that every day. Sorry to cut you off, but I'm teaching Josh, and the very first time that we faced a little design decision, the very first complexity we ran into. And I said, okay, let's write a spec to prove out how we're going to do this. And he was like, okay. And we just started writing a spec. There was no discussion of this is what TDD means and all that stuff. He just took it as gospel immediately without any justification whatsoever. And I guarantee you that if we, as we've done this, he's just learning that that's the way that you do it. And when he takes that forward, he's just going to assume that's the way you do it. Someday if he gets a job, let's say quote unquote a normal job, and they tell him, don't write a test, or we don't have time for testing, he's going to have a WTF moment.
Yeah, that's super common, and that's super common from what I've seen with beginners getting their first job. Is if they're in an environment where if they have an internship or we're at a place that lets them do the right thing, and then they go get a job doing other things, they struggle very much. One of my former students learned all kinds of modern stuff when he was in our classes, and then got his first programming job at a place that uses a programming language that no longer exists. You can't YouTube it, you can't Google it, you can't find any information on this programming language. It no longer exists because it was a commercial programming language, developed by a specific company to solve a specific problem domain, and that company folded up.
Was it PIC?
No, I'm not going to say anything about what it is, but what I'm saying is he didn't know how to handle that because all he had was his fundamentals of building software. And I worry sometimes that we as people who are trying to educate, and we as software developers are not mindful enough about those kinds of things, those fundamentals, those things that transcend languages, and we tend to focus too much in on specific ways of doing things. I worry about that sometimes, especially for people at the beginning who they treat our maxims as laws. They treat test everything as a law. Yeah, okay, I'm going to test everything. Rather than the more experience you get, you realize, well, okay, we don't actually test everything, but we test some things, and we test the important things. And the beginners, they don't.
I mean, that's really that's the beauty. That's the beauty of apprenticeship versus classroom, though, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Because a proper apprenticeship is measured in years, and that's like what. I'm going to spend years being an apprentice. Like, yeah.
Yes, you are.
Because over the course of years, you're going to learn when you test and when you don't.
Look at the people who come and do electrical work on your house. A lot of times there's an apprentice along. And he's the one pulling all the cables and stuff, and he's the one doing all that work. But he's learning those kinds of skills. He's learning how to do it. And he's learning it in so many different environments. And eventually he'll pay that forward to someone else in the future.
Well, and the other thing is that apprentice, like you said, he's doing it in so many different circumstances, but when he gets out on his own and he tries to do something different, going back to Obie's WTF example, right? This guy's going to eventually go work somewhere else, and he's going to run into, okay, don't write that test. And he's going to do it, and then he's going to be like, man, I spent like 10 minutes just sitting there staring at the screen because I'm so used to writing a spec that I didn't even know what to do until I finally just kind of noodled it out. And the spec was a tool that allowed me to do that. And I had a check at the end. And so he figures out, okay, through some kind of experimentation, I definitely want to write these specs first if I can. And then when he gets to the edge of his knowledge, the things that Obie doesn't walk him toward and lead him to the water and show him how to do what he has to do, he knows basically how that's approached because he's seen so many examples of, this worked this way and this worked that way, and it becomes ingrained. Well, then I think it's probably this or that because based on what I already know and the things that I've seen that are trade-offs, this pays off. And you only get that through some kind of longer-term apprenticeship.
Yeah, and just a side note here, or sidebar, if you're listening to this and you're in a position to either directly or indirectly influence government policy towards retraining programs and technical kind of training, strongly consider subsidizing putting people who need retraining into apprenticeship kinds of situations. I mean, we're paying them unemployment anyway. You might as well make it a productive use of their time, and you can start someone with very, very little knowledge of programming whatsoever. I mean, they're going to end up sitting next to you and struggling to follow along, but they will get over that hump eventually. I mean, we learned this. Jason and I learned this in Africa as well, because some of our people just had never used a terminal before, and we were taking them from first principles and trying to teach them up. You can do it. It is doable. It's just a matter of who subsidizes it. Like I'm fortunate enough to be in a position right now where I can personally subsidize this exercise, right? Like someone might be listening to this and going, Obie, you're spending 2 hours a day with an apprentice. Like I have to be at work at 9:00. So I mean, I'm fortunate enough to do it, but I mean, there are people out there who are capable of, if not doing this directly themselves, influencing programs that can subsidize this sort of thing. And then eventually, and I know this is a long-term goal, a long-term vision, we could, as a society, get to the point where it was more common.
Now, we need to get to picks soon, but I have one more question that I'm hoping you can answer in like a minute or two, and that is, how does Rails actually help us do this? Because we've been talking a lot about how we as people do this, but Rails as a tool, how does this fit into this? Or is it just kind of a tangential or orthogonal conversation?
I have an answer for that. I have a pretty good answer for that, I think. The stuff that really sucks about my time with Josh, or when it really bogs down and demotivates me, is when something doesn't work. You know, like,
do you have an example?
I'll give you a perfect example. Like we're trying to use Bootstrap's alpha version, like, you know, and I went in and put in tabs. They didn't work. Okay, well, maybe the syntax changed. It's not the same as Bootstrap 3, whatever. So we go and we look at the reference, and if, they had changed. So we put in all the classes, everything like that. Still didn't work. We double check it, didn't work. Triple check it, didn't work. Delete the whole thing, start over, do it a different way, didn't work. We chewed up over half an hour or more trying to figure out how tabs worked or why they weren't working and what it was, and including searching GitHub issues and stuff like that. And like some of them made it sound like it didn't actually work, they're broken or whatever. When stuff doesn't work, it's incredibly demotivating, especially for a beginner, because like even with fundamental stuff that does work, he's kind of drowning a little bit. But if it's stuff that you're trying to debug why it doesn't work at all, like now there's times where I feel like I'm completely losing him, right? So how does that answer your question? With Rails 5, as long as you stay away from some of these new additions, everything mostly just works. You know, so like I might have to Google to remind myself, or, you know, look in my book to remind myself of, you know, what is this function? What is this helper called or whatever, but it just works. So you're able to move quickly and you're able to make definitive statements about this is how you do this thing. And that makes this whole topic that we've been discussing of apprenticeship and teaching and learning to do things the right way a lot easier to swallow.
All right. Hey everybody, this is Charles Max Wood. I just wanted to talk to you really briefly about JS Remote Conf. We just picked speakers. Things are looking really good, and we're really excited to cover a broad range of topics for JavaScript developers. So if you're looking to learn things about Node.js, about becoming a better developer, about deployment, about mobile development, and much more about JavaScript, then come check us out, jsremoteconf.com. You can also find it by going to devchat.tv/conferences and then picking the conference you want. We have last year's recordings there. We have this year's conference coming up, so make sure you get your ticket, and we'll see you there.
Apprenticeship and teaching and learning to do things the right way a lot easier to swallow.
All right. Well, I do want to be mindful of time, so let's go ahead and do some picks. Jason, do you want to start us off with picks?
Sure thing. So I recently was on a very long flight and I brought some books with me. One of the books I brought with me was one I read a long time ago and wanted to reread. It's a book by an author named Bill Bryson, who's a pretty well-known author, so you might have heard of him. This particular book was called The Lost Continent. And he drove around America and went to all these small towns searching for like the perfect small town. And all of Bill Bryson's books are just super funny. And this one is really funny too. So I really recommend that book and pretty much all his books. So that's pick number one. My second pick is a place. So last week I went and delivered this 3-day training class on Angular. And the place I taught it was in Sofia, Bulgaria. I had to look on the map to see where Bulgaria was because I didn't even know. But I went there and it was a really interesting place. It's in the Balkan Mountains It was pretty cold when I went there, similar climate to here in Michigan. But it was a really interesting place and, off the beaten path. Like you don't hear people say like, I'm going to go on vacation to Bulgaria, but if you get a chance, it's a really, really interesting place. Go check it out. So that's my second pick.
Nice. Brian, what are your picks?
All right. I have 2 picks. The first is Pi-hole. Pi-hole. P-I as in Raspberry Pi. It's basically it's a black hole for your internet advertisements and things like that. So you set it up on a Raspberry Pi or on a small device on your network. It runs a DNS server, and you just point all your internal DNS, like on your router, just for your DHCP, just point DNS to this thing, and then you're blocking all the malware and the advertisements on all the devices on your network. Takes like a minute or so to set up. And it works really well. There's a couple of block lists it can subscribe to and automatically pull the new block lists down. It's pretty great. Really easy to get going.
I guess the implication being that you don't have to install this function on all of your devices.
Right. Because especially like if you're, think about, you may have like an ad blocker or something on your laptop, but then you go grab your phone to look at something, and all of a sudden, bam. You can't, ads everywhere. But if your mobile devices and all that are going to be covered by this too.
Awesome.
The other one I have, which I mentioned a long time ago, but it's become a daily fixture for me, is a Vim plugin called VimWiki. It's been around for a long time, but I can't stress how great this is, because I'm in Vim most of my day. And I often find myself needing to take notes during a meeting, or take some notes about a conversation, or keep a to-do list, things like that. And VimWiki is just a keystroke away in Vim. Whatever I'm working on, I can use leader WW, and my wiki's right there, and I can start taking notes right away. I don't have to switch to another program. I don't have to switch context. I can immediately start taking notes. And it supports to-do lists. It supports links to other pages, internal pages, external pages, and you can export the thing to an HTML documentation structure if you need to. So I've been keeping my code snippets in it. I've been keeping meeting notes in it. I've been keeping my weekly to-dos in it, because one of the things that I've learned a long time ago is that I was starting to feel like I wasn't accomplishing anything at the end of each day. I'd kind of like, I had this whole day and I didn't accomplish anything. So I started at the end of the day, I started just keeping a journal of what did I do today. And it's really helpful to look back on that throughout the weeks and the months. And if you ever have to have a one-on-one with your manager, it's actually really helpful to have a daily log of all the things that you've accomplished and all the things that you did, so you can identify patterns and stuff. And this VimWiki made that frictionless for me to just jot down what I got done each day. Those are my 2.
Awesome. I'm going to jump in here with a few picks. The first one is that if you're on the Ruby Rogues mailing list, you've probably noticed that you've been getting a lot of emails about JS Remote Conf. Of course, by the time this comes out, that was like a few weeks ago. And I use a system called Drip, and I love it to death. So anyway, if you're looking to do that kind of thing, email marketing, then definitely check it out. One other thing that I'm going to pick, and I'm trying to find the link in my browser history, but I have decided that my next computer that I buy I'm actually going to build a PC and put Windows on it, because the MacBook Pro just kind of turned me off on that kind of thing. It wasn't a big enough step up for me. So anyway, I found a guide, or at least a list of parts that you can buy. I modified it some, so I'll go ahead and put links into the show notes for that. But anyway, I'm building a PC. It's going to cost me about $2,000 to put it all together, but I'm looking forward to having a machine that has like 64 gigs of RAM and a ton of hard drive space and stuff like that, which is something I'm really not getting out of my MacBook Pro that I currently have, and I didn't really see it as a major step up to get the other. One other pick that I have, if you're new, because we talked a lot about apprenticeships, is Newbie Remote Conf, which is going to happen in July. It's an online conference. If you sign up now, it's $100. The price will go up, so you probably want to do that soon. So definitely check that out as well. And then finally, for my microphone, I talk a lot about my audio equipment, when I buy new stuff. So I bought this shock mount, which is if you bump the arm, it doesn't vibrate in the microphone. Well, the elastics are pretty crappy on it. And so I found some new elastics for it. And this is for the RE20 shock mount. So I'll put links to that in the show note as well. But they're a lot thicker bands, and it'll actually hold the microphone up, which this doesn't do. Obie, do you have some picks for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I love this part. One, real quickly, I mentioned earlier in the show, The Artist's Way, which awesome book. You've probably heard of it, but I've tried to read it like 3 or 4 times. I never get past the first couple of chapters, but one of the takeaways I got from it was to unblock yourself creatively at the beginning of each day by writing in a journal. And the best tool that I've found that I've been using now for over 5 years is called 750words.com. And it has a really, really nice interface for developing streaks of writing. It uses a bowling scoring metaphor. So if you hit, it's got a strip of 30 boxes across the top of the interface, and for the days of the month. And when you get your 750, you get an X. If you get less than 750, you get a slash. It's like a spare. If you don't write, you get an empty box, and it motivates you to keep it going. I was looking at my stats, and I've written a lot, like almost 100,000 words that way. And it plus it gives you all this metadata. I can't recommend it enough. It used to be free. I think it's got a small charge now, but really well worth it, especially if you're trying to practice being a writer or a creative of any type. So highly recommended, 750words.com. I love to plug them because they're just amazing, and I want them to stay alive forever. And I want to also mention, I spent a week in Cuba, kind of riffing off Jason's recommendation of Bulgaria. Probably some similarities there, but in a Caribbean setting with better music. And, for me, it was going back and researching my roots, because both my parents are from Cuba. They immigrated after the revolution. And it was just amazing. It was just, I know tons has been said about Cuba, but they're opening up, so it's really easy to go. Like, you might think, oh, isn't it a big deal to go? Like, American citizens are not allowed to go. No, you're totally allowed to go. No big deal on the visa. You pay $50. There's direct flights on Delta and JetBlue. You have to take cash because your credit cards don't work, and it's an eye-opening experience to actually see how life works in an actual socialist society. So this, like, go look at what certain people are afraid of, and it's definitely gone too far in the other direction where there's economic issues, but it's amazing and eye-opening as an American to go and see it. And also, as a Cuban American, I grew up with a lot of propaganda on this side about how bad things are in Cuba. Well, I got there and realized, oh my God, like, people aren't starving. The highways are great. As far as I can tell, there's medical care for everyone. People are reasonably happy and do the things that you would associate. But they don't have a lot of those excesses that we have that I think are kind of poisonous to our culture. So 2 thumbs up, highly recommended for Cuba. Go before it opens up so much that it turns into everywhere else. Okay, and then I want to plug a couple of things. One is, I'm speaking at MagmaConf in Colima, Mexico, which is near Guadalajara. Doesn't cost too much to fly into Guadalajara from almost anywhere in the States. It's an amazing conference that has been going on for several years now. Really, really good organizers. They really know what they're doing. It's at a beautiful beach location. I'm giving the keynote on the second day, I believe. The keynote is going to be called "Let's Laugh So We Don't Cry." I'm going to be talking about kind of my philosophy of life and how it relates to development and where we're going. And I'm going to bring in some elements of philosophy around absurdist thought and existentialism and things like that. So I'm trying to make that really interesting. So if you want to go, I know that you can get a ticket for about 30% off now with a coupon code, but I'm going to see if I can get your listeners a 50% off code. It's still time to get a ticket. And then also, I'm running what I think is a really good deal right now for purchasers of the Lean Pub version of the Rails 5-Way. So you can currently buy the Rails 5-Way on Lean Pub, which, by the way, is a fantastic service. But importantly, if you pay, I think like $10 extra right now, you can get free early access or $10 early access to my next 2 titles, which means that like basically there'll be a coupon code specifically for the people that buy this package deal. And as soon as I start publishing betas of Mastering the Rails Way and Testing the Rails Way, which I will be doing in the summer, you'll get immediate access to those without having to pay anything additional. So that's those are my 2 plugs as picks.
Awesome. Well, if people want to follow you, follow up on what you're doing, it sounds like Lean Pub's a good way, but do you have a blog or Twitter or GitHub that you want to plug for us real quick?
Yeah, totally. Probably the best portal to all that stuff is to just go to obiefernandez.com. That's my name. .com, and there's links to my Twitter and to my Medium blog and to my shop where I sell contracts and things like that, contract templates. Follow me on Twitter at Obie, OBIE. I'm not a super active Twitter user, but I do generally post links to all my relevant activities and things that I'm doing on Twitter.
All right. Well, thank you for coming, Obie. You're somebody I've been watching for a while, and it's been fun to just chat and kind of hear where you're at these days.
Thank you, guys. It's a real honor and a pleasure to be on the show. I hope it's not the last time.
Nope, won't be.
It's not the first time, actually, believe it or not. I was on the show during a RubyConf once with Josh Susser.
Oh, yeah.
And some of the other folks. Yeah, but yeah, really enjoyed it.
All right. Well, we'll wrap this one up. Thanks, everyone, for coming, and we'll catch everyone next week.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.